these historic practices go back so far back in our history, in that we've, Black and brown people have been pushed into these spaces that are detrimental to their health, to their
Mm-hmm.
well-being as well. um, we didn't get a pick to where we were going to be setting up our communities, but here we are, and we're surrounded by all these multiple sources of pollution that prevent us from going out.
Sabrosura pa' ti que.
Hello, everyone. This is Pam, the Café con Pam, the bilingual podcast that features Latine and people of the global majority who break barriers, change lives, and make this world a better place. Welcome to episode 354, Avion. Ah! I'm not going to miss the aviones at all. Welcome to episode 354 of Café con Pam. Today, we have a conversation with Liz Hurtado. Liz is a national field manager at Moms Clean Air Force, supporting the Eco Madres program in its mission to empower and mobilize Latino communities to fight for clean air, equitable climate change solutions, and protections from toxic chemicals. Liz's background lies in the intersectionality of health equity and has spent years amplifying the need for diverse representation in health research through community engagement, education, and advocating for language justice. As a mother of four, Liz centers her work around protecting the most vulnerable and fighting for children's environmental health protections. Listeners, this episode with Liz was really informative because we talked about the various ways that communities like ours get affected in the climate. Now, I do want to clarify, we just had an interview with Isabel from Eco Madres también, and we wanted to bring Liz for Earth Month. And so, as we are entering Earth Month, and in April, we are talking a lot about the environment, we wanted to bring this conversation again because I think it's important to cover the various aspects in which we are affected. Y bueno, sin más, aquí está mi conversación con Liz Hurtado. Liz, welcome to Café con Pam.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Yes, I'm excited to talk to you. So, the first pregunta that we ask is, what is your heritage?
I am Peruvian American. I was born in Peru, but moved to the States at the age of 6. So consider myself American as well.
For sure. What made your family decide to come?
Yeah, so really it was my mom's career. She had an opportunity to accept a position here in the Washington, D.C. metro area. So we moved to Maryland at age 6, and that's pretty much where I lived most of my life. But now, as of 3 years ago, I'm based in Virginia Beach, Virginia.
Still on the East Coast.
Yes.
And have you gone back to Peru?
I have, yes. We were fortunate enough to travel, anywhere from 2 to 3 years throughout my childhood. And now that I'm a mom myself, I have 4 kids. So definitely strive to take them back and learn all the things about our beautiful country whenever we can.
That's awesome. How was it for you to return? How old were you when you went back the first time?
Oh, it wasn't far from, the time that we moved to the United States, maybe a year or two after. Not for the greatest or happiest reasons. My grandmother died soon after, so we went back for that. But then, yeah, every other time it was, to visit family. It wasn't quite vacation mode all the time. It was, hopping around from aunt to grandmother to everyone who we hadn't seen those years, and just spending time. So, it's been beautiful. But as I got older, wanted to explore more of the country. It's such a hugely diverse and rich country. So now we're really taking advantage of like hopping around to different departments and different cities so we can explore more.
Nice. That's awesome because I could totally relate to the having to pop and visit the tias and the primos and the like all the people. For me, I grew up in Mexico City, and so it's gotten less. I have less friends there now,
Yeah.
but it used to be that I was literally going from family to friends, and I'm like, isn't this supposed to be relaxing? And then you need a vacation from your vacation. Yeah.
Exactly.
So you grew up in DC, and how do you get into this field that you're in?
Yeah, it wasn't, a linear path by any means. I didn't study anything within the environmental climate space. Really, my background is more in like project management, marketing. And through my professional experience, I got into community engagement, which is what I found out to be my true passion. I love connecting with people, be that, intermediary between the need and the solutions, and see how I can help tell their stories. And so my focus for the past 4 or 5 years had been really in the health equity or public equity space, working to support a health research program and bringing more diversity into health research with a particular focus on getting Latino communities comfortable with the idea of sharing health data. And then that translated to this opportunity that arose in me participating in an environmental department agency project at my previous job, where it was kind of like a bittersweet feeling. They're like, "You're too good at what you're doing right now. We want to keep you there." And I'm like, "But my passion is in the environment. This is such a great opportunity." So that kind of sparked, you know, a moment for me where I'm like, I need to follow my calling. I need to, really dive into this space head in, forget my fears that I may not have the traditional experience or education or knowledge. I'll do what I can. And it just so happens that, I kind of had my, not a vision board per se, but like my visionary list of like some key organizations in this space that I really was hoping to find a position in. And this opportunity with Mom's Clean Air Force came by, and it was the perfect mix of like my professional experience with my passion and environment and my whole identity as a mother, all combined into one, which was so unique, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not just a job, it's a passion, which I can actually wake up every day and feel like I'm doing something meaningful and actually care to spend all of my time, like invest all of my time in. So it was, like I said, not linear by any means, but it was what was meant to be for me.
We're going to dissect that. So when you go into PM, marketing, all that stuff, when do you discover that you care about the environment? Or was that always a thing?
Yeah, no, I can take that back to when I was very little. I mean, that has always been a passion of mine, just my interconnected with nature, my need to be outdoors. I never wanted to stay inside. And I know kids nowadays, are on their phones or on their screens. But for us, in my childhood, we were also on our Nintendos and all these things or computers, but I always wanted to be outdoors, whether it was, riding my bike or roller skating and scraping my elbows. I mean, I needed to be immersed in that. And as I grew older, I found myself needing to be even more connected. So I would always travel to the mountains or, living in Maryland, I was about 2.5 hours away drive to the beach. But I would
Mm.
do that, in any given day because I needed to be closer to the water. I needed to be more immersed in that environment and not just from afar. So it's always been something that I felt has been a calling for me, to take care of nature, to be one with nature, to reconnect with our roots. And I know a lot of this has to do with our heritage, especially for me growing up in Peru. I guess people don't really consider Lima or see Lima as a desert, but it's a desert. It's just a city built in a desert, and we're a coastal city as well. So having that mix of environments, getting the opportunity to travel into the rainforest, into the Amazon. I mean, these are experiences that live with you, right? And so, kind of that innate passion to take care of our world has always lived with me. And then as I grew older and started seeing how much of a crisis we're in, I was like, I can't sit back and just watch this happen. I need to see where I can fit in, what role I can take in helping to address this or helping to mitigate this in any way that's in my power. So that was kind of the jumping point for me.
Do you think going back to Peru influenced your love for nature? Because for me, I grew up in Mexico City, and the to your point of like we had Nintendos, and it was kind of like that generation where like, oh, tech is coming in. And living and existing in a place that, one, perhaps technology is not as accessible as it is here. Two, the city infrastructure is built different. And even I've not been to Lima, pero en la Ciudad de México, por ejemplo, there's, I mean, we can argue here, but it's kind of like a practice, and maybe in Lima is similar, where people go to the plaza and then you hang out, like, because it's such a Catholic place. In Mexico, por ejemplo, you go to misa, and then afuera hay un parquecito, and then you just hang out, and it's a thing that it just kind of like you do. And so, do you think having gone back to Peru so much kind of like instilled this like be outside thing? Like it was probably in you already, but like also the environment influenced?
Yeah, definitely. Going back and seeing how richly, geographically diverse Peru is something that instilled that curiosity from a very
Mhm.
early age. Like, what else is out there that I don't know? What else can I experience? But if we're talking about an influencer in my life, I mean, it was always my mom. My mom, from all the various stories that she's told me of her childhood and into her, educational and professional experiences, she's always sought out those opportunities where she could travel. If it meant like, hey, I'm going to study for this one test that's going to give me a scholarship to, travel to this other country, she would seek those out specifically so that she could see what else is out there. And so we're fortunate enough, when I came around and my brother came around, that she would take us with her. And she would always plan, weekend getaways whenever we had a little break. And, living in the Maryland, DC area, we have our mountains, right? So she would take us to Luray Cavern. She would take us to the mountains. She would plan um, ski trips, which was not very common for us Latinos then. It's becoming more common now. But like she was always the one kind of spearheading these adventurous moments for us. And I know my brother feels the same. He is also very much like me in that he needs that piece of nature always fulfilling his life.
I love that you mentioned the ski trips, because it is, and even I would argue that to this day it's not super like you see more brown people, pero todavía no es like a thing. I'm assuming back then it was probably really not a thing where you saw a lot of people look like you. Did you ever have conversations with your mom about it?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, my mom's best friend, the friend that she grew up with in Peru, she moved to the States a few years before us, and we ended up in the same exact area as she did. And they had a home. She married an American here in the US, and they had a seasonal home in the mountains of Pennsylvania. So that was when we first started going, and it kind of became a yearly thing. And yeah, we were the only brown people there. And to this day, like I just did a ski trip with my husband in February. And I think perhaps we saw two or three others. And it was like that moment we're like, oh my God, hey, like we're waving each other down from across the mountain
I
because
see
it's
you.
such a rare sight. But yeah, I mean, I think it's really great that we are making those spaces. There's communities and organizations like Latino Outdoors who
Mhm.
really emphasizes that we belong in these spaces, right?
Mhm.
And it makes it easy for us to get back out there, like understanding that there's so many parts of the country and so many communities that may not even have fresh air to step outside their homes, right? So, but how do we make the nature accessible to them? How do we make or break down those barriers for folks to get outdoors where we truly belong or we deserve to take up space?
For sure, especially because traditionally in the US, communities of color don't have parks. And so the culture of being outside, now bringing it back to the US, it's almost like by design. It's like they want to keep us inside.
Yeah, I mean, these historic practices go back so far back in our history, in that we've, Black and Brown people have been pushed into these spaces that are detrimental to their health, you know, to their well-being as well. We didn't get a pick to where we were going to be setting up our communities, but here we are, and we're surrounded by all these multiple sources of pollution that prevent us from going outside. And in many cases, we don't even have the information available to know what's in our air. Is it even healthy to be outdoors? Can I take my kid to the park today? But I don't know if the air quality is good enough to take him, you know?
For sure.
And these are fears that people across the country here in the US live with because there isn't the data available to them. There aren't the efforts to make that data accessible or in their language, right? And so that's something that we certainly advocate for, to make sure that there is greater transparency across the board in terms of what people are breathing in, what's in their water,
Mm,
you know, because we want people to thrive. We don't want people to have to think about these things day in and day out. We just want people to live and experience and, have these positive experiences that others in the US are experiencing currently. So I know we'll get into a little bit more of my work in Eco Madres, but that's really kind of at the center of our goals. It's empowering people to um, live the lives that they were meant to live, right? And how do we do that? It's through empowering them through using their voice, right? Like um, we have been forced into these spaces, but that doesn't mean that has to be the end, right? We can show up for our communities. We can bring our voices and our um, solutions to these tables and spaces and demand that these things are rectified for our community so that we can thrive.
for sure. Totally. And to bring it back to, we'll get to Eco Madres, but to bring it back to your story. So you go into the corporate space, and it's kind of like your lifestyle is, you like the outdoors, you do things outside, blah, blah, blah. Just like your mom instilled this in you as you began your family, did you also begin like, okay, kids, we're going to go outside? Did you have any, like, I don't know, I would say rules, but like, parameters of being outside with your
Yeah, I
kids?
mean, there weren't necessarily any boundaries or limits or things like that in terms of what we were going to do. I definitely love giving my kids the freedom to choose on what we're doing or taking part in those decisions, right? But absolutely, my daughter, when I had her, we were living in Miami at that time, right? So we
Wow.
were steps away from the water, and whenever I could, we were down on Biscayne Bay or wherever it may be, just soaking it all in. And then moved back to Maryland, had my son, and we're close to the mountains. We're near Great Falls Park, and I would strap him on my back, and I have my toddler in hand because they're just 4 years apart, and we just go hiking. You know,
Mm,
um, I was a single mother for a huge part of their upbringing, but that was always I guess the time where we could just be. We didn't have to think about finances or where are we going to live or any of those stressors in our lives living as a single mother, but that was just our escape.
mm. I
That's
love
really where we could reconnect, release anything that we were holding on to. um Hopefully they don't remember any of that, but that's where I could just be and just enjoy in their childhood. And to this day, that's what they ask. Just yesterday, despite my awful allergies, despite my son being on, allergy medications, they're like, "Hey, can we go see the cherry blossoms?" And I'm like packing up my tissues and taking medicine. I'm like, "Yep, let's go."
That's gonna be fun.
Yeah. So they love it. They, whether they realize it or not, it was a huge part of their childhood, which is the same reason why they love it today.
Y entonces, the research, and like, did you know before you moved into Ecomadres, did you know like everything that happens? Por ejemplo, 25 million kids travel via bus, and the majority of buses use diesel as their fuel. The other one, that which we've talked about, low income communities and people of the global majority, typically have the biggest, y lo estoy traduciendo, por eso. Las comunidades de bajos ingresos y las de color, como las latinas, tienen más probabilidades de vivir en áreas con la peor calidad de aire y son más propensos a sufrir y morir de enfermedades como asma. Did you know all of that? Like, was that something that was in your radar as you like, were your kids the catalyst of like, let's see what's happening in the environment?
When I tell you my mind was blown, I mean, I can't even put into words, what I felt in those first months in joining this team with all this data coming my way and, understanding that connection between our environmental harms or pollution and our health, especially our
Mm,
children's health, right? Because they're so much more vulnerable to all these pollutants. Um, I cried. I, went down the rabbit hole of greater research. I held my kids tighter, like it was all these emotions because I didn't know. I was very privileged growing up. I was in a majority white communities as I grew up into my adulthood. So we had the privilege of living in spaces where we had easy access to green spaces.
mm,
We didn't live right in front of a highway with all these pollutant vehicles clogging up our air. We didn't experience that, and I didn't know. I didn't know until I really dove into more of the health research when I was working at my previous job and understanding the inequities that exist amongst our communities. And then in that moment, I was learning about genetics, right? Our lifestyle factors and kind of sort of our environmental factors, but I didn't really dive too much into that until I joined Eco Madres and I saw
mm.
the stark differences in what we experience across the country. And it's not just communities of color; it's also low income communities, right? And that can be our neighbors right next door. It's not something far away. What a lot of people are like, oh, we never knew this happened. It's happening next door. We just
Mhm.
happen to live in this little block that is surrounded by trees that has the highway miles down that way. But that was really a space where I could be like, well, here living in my privileged state, I'm in a position where I can help others bring those stories to light. I can help kind of be that conduit to them um, identifying all the wrongs that they've been living with and help to reach those people who have the power to make decisions, to hear their stories and to really reflect on the state of this country and what we can be doing better.
Totally. Okay, this is a great time to take a coffee break, and then we'll return with more questions.
Sabrosura pa' tu que que.
Liz, do you drink coffee?
I do. Yeah, I cannot get my day started without coffee.
How do you drink your coffee?
It depends. So I love breakfast. It's the I guess my favorite part of the day. I usually have a big, fulfilling breakfast, and it's usually salty. And
Nice.
so then my coffee is sweet. A little bit of oat
Mm.
milk or almond milk and some sugar. On days where I choose to have like a, you know, Nutella and banana toast, which is super sweet, then I'll take my coffee black. It just depends on the day.
Oh, so you use it as balance.
It's balance.
Nice. I love that. On my end, today I'm drinking Four Sigmatic Balance. So typically I drink Think. So I've been using Four
Mm.
Sigmatic for a long time. I have tried other mushroom coffees and they're like anxiety galore. So I went back to the one that works, which is Four Sigmatic for me. And I have a code, Stay Shining, if you want to get 10% off.
Love that.
But today I'm drinking Balance, and that one it has reishi and it has, I don't remember what's the other nootropic that it has, but basically it's not such a like it makes you super focused type of coffee. The
Hmm.
Think one does. This one it's more like, all right, chill, but you still have your coffee. And the reason why I'm drinking that one today is because yesterday I was the closing keynote for a conference, and so it was like super high energy, and so today I'm trying to like chill out and that's why I'm drinking my low balance.
I'm going to need you to send me that link and code after this. I've
Yes.
tried Rise mushroom coffee. That's the one and only I tried. And then I was like, you know what? I'm just going to stick to my regular coffee. So I'm open to trying new things.
So no shade to Bryce, but that one is one that I literally I don't mind the earthy flavor. So everyone complains like it tastes like dirt. Well, it is dirt, and so that I don't mind. But what happens to me is the effect. So I don't know what they put. I haven't looked into it, but I tried it for a week, and it was literally like it wasn't borderline panic attacks, but it was too much anxiety, and I was like, "There's no way." Like, I cannot function like this. And so that one didn't work for me.
Yeah, that is so interesting how our bodies are so different and
Hmm.
react so differently. That one actually was better for me than coffee. I couldn't get
The
past the
flavor.
earthy taste. Yep, that was me.
I know lots of people are like, it tastes like actual, like I'm literally eating the mushrooms of the earth. And I'm like, we probably are. So yeah, I understand that the flavor is the thing. But do you have a favorite coffee shop in Virginia?
Oh my gosh, yes, we have so many here. I in my 3 years here, I still haven't gone to them all. But we are just about 15 minutes to the boardwalk, and they have a whole spread of coffees, maybe every 2 blocks. And there's this one, I think it's called Java Surf, if I'm not mistaken. But they have Hawaiian coffee and all
Mm,
different combinations that you can think of, and that has to be my favorite. Yeah, I don't think I had even tried Hawaiian coffee before then, but it was truly delicious.
I love that. You know, Hawaiian coffee doesn't get enough love, I don't think.
No, I hadn't seen it before.
I know. I do like Hawaiian coffee. It's like specific, pero it's good. We do have a Hawaiian coffee shop here, and I drink their coffee from time to time, and it's good. But it's not like Colombian coffee or like that's like the standard. Which I mean, to their credit, like Colombian coffee is considered one of the best
Amazing.
coffees.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
So let's get back to the show. Listeners, as you know, I'm a recovering procrastinator. And because of that, I'm often building ways to getting things done. Inside the annual Manny's Pass, we get to embrace our own unique ways of achieving. Together, in our weekly office hours and cafecitos, we'll find strength in our differences, accountability in our goals, and power in our voices as we heal our inner child through coaching and tapping. Your choice. Let's redefine productivity on our terms. Visit cafecompam.com/Manny's Pass and join us. Okay, Liz. So, how do you get this job at Eco Madres? ¿Cómo sucede?
A lot of Googling, a lot of time spent on LinkedIn and Indeed and all those search sites. Um, I took my time. I really did take my time. I wanted to make sure that my, next move was very intentional. I didn't want to find myself in a position where I was feeling more of the like, what am I doing here? Right? Am I fully immersing myself in this career, or is it just another job? So I
Mm,
was very, very intentional in my search. And again, when I read that job description, because I had never heard of Mom's Clean Air Force before, but when I read that job description and I'm reading through the expectations and the requirements and all those things, I'm like, huh, I have some of that. Yep, have some of that. And sprinkled with my passion of environment and being a mom, I was like, this makes sense. I was like, this almost makes too much sense to be true, right? Um, and I know we as women often go through this period of like imposter syndrome, right? Like we don't meet all the qualifications that they're asking for, so I'm just not going to apply for that. And that was my case for like half a second. And I'm like, you know what? I'm done with that. I've done this far too often in my life where I'm like, I don't know that that is the right fit for me, or fear of being turned down. I'm like, you know what? I have nothing to lose. I need to just jump in. And I did. I interviewed, met some incredible people through that interview, and I was like, yeah, this is it. I was like, this is really where I want to be. And they, I guess, felt the same. So they hired me, and here I am. years later.
And what is your role?
I'm a national field manager, and I specifically focus on our Latino engagement program called Eco Madres. So, as a national field manager, I work with our team from various states across the country in what their local or state initiatives are. How do we amplify that at the national level? And with Eco Madres, obviously it's through a Latino or Spanish language lens. How do we reach our communities? How do we make sure that we're being intentional and bringing them into these spaces? How do we provide the educational component so that everybody has this level of understanding about the connections between environment and our children's health and climate change, so that they can take action and they can feel empowered to take action with us.
Mm, I love that. So I do want to talk about, because we recently released the episode with Isabel, who's also part of the Eco Madres team. And I love that we're having this follow up because I'm like, oh, let's talk about this. So we got a comment on YouTube who said, by the Liquid Llama, I'm Latino and the rainforest is thriving more than ever. I've been there and I can tell you that climate change is a lie. What would you say?
Breaks my heart to hear that, because that's something we have to battle so often here in the US, where we face climate deniers, and
Why do you think that happens?
greed.
Mm.
It's greed. It's people saying, well, if I admit that this is happening, that means I need to do something about it.
Mm.
And that might mean,
My comfort's going to be disturbed.
yeah, I can't speak for everybody, obviously, but that's my understanding of that. I can't find another possible reason, right? We're talking about children's health. We're talking about families' livelihoods being destroyed by corporate greed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I can't see another possible reason for people not to think about future generations or what we're doing to our world. It's a shared world, and people feel okay just sticking with the status quo and not taking action. So
Totally. Yo creo que ahí, I think, and tell me if you agree, I think what happens a lot is how the narrative is twisted in different ways. Y just to be fair, the narrative could be twisted to one side and to the other. And muchas veces, especialmente en Spanish media, uno, porque there's not that many outlets en español. Dos, porque who's funding those media outlets. Y tres, pues es la narrativa like, what's the narrative that they want people to understand. Y muchas veces lo que yo veo, por ejemplo, es que Spanish speaking media, they cover something y luego en inglés yo lo veo and I'm like, completely different.
you nailed it. Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's why at Eco Madres, that's honestly a big component of what we strive to do, is getting our voice and our stories and our reasoning out there into the media, specifically Spanish language media, because there is so much misinformation happening. And it always happens even more going into an election year, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we know that there's all these competing narratives. And so we want to make sure that our narrative is front and center. We want to make sure people are, empowered with the facts and potential solutions, and inviting them to be part of the solution making, so that um, people take ownership of those next steps, what they're going to do with that information. We all know, and we should know by now, that we can't trust everything we hear on social or on media, yet our brain just tends to function that way, and we sometimes do get trapped into those narratives because they come at you strong. And that's the reality of it, unless we fully remove ourselves from those spaces, which is impossible nowadays. And
Yes.
we're going to be confronted with a lot of misinformation. And if you're not the type that will, fact check or follow up to make sure that what was said was true, you're just going to believe it. And so that's why we really hope that, as we're building out this community of Eco Madres, and it's not just madres, it's padres, abuelos, tias, anyone who's invested in protecting children's health. We hope that more of these voices come forward and say, hey, this is the truth. This is what we're experiencing. This is what we need you all to know so that you can help us in this fight to protect our communities.
What would you say to people? Porque siempre es así como que, well, when we talk about climate change, it just feels like this overwhelming, like it's so much. Pero I think many times what we don't realize is that we can start with our community. We can start with, just like with the podcast with Isabel, you should start with a park in honor of her mom. And so what would be the 3 things that people can start getting involved with? And I still I cannot believe the diesel thing with the buses, the school buses. Like, it's something that, I mean, I don't have kids, but I have nieces and nephews, and just the thought that they're smelling the fumes from diesel every time they go and come from school is wild.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's exactly it, right? It's like once you have this piece of information, you want to take that next step to get other people informed, right? Like for me, finding out those staggering statistics about what's in our air or what's happening to our kids or how these environmental pollutants are affecting their health, and it's gonna, stay with them through their livelihoods, um, was what propelled me to take action and start speaking about it more. A lot of times in our communities, especially in our Latino communities, we have so many different things that we are worried about or have to think about on the day to
Exacto.
day that climate change and environment is always pushed to the last thing. But what we've learned now through all this polling and through surveys is that Latinos are really concerned about climate change. We may just not be so open to speaking about it, which is why people tend to believe that we don't care. But that's not true
Mm,
at all. Not true at all. The numbers tell us a different story, that we are concerned. We see it happening. We just often feel like we are not in a position to do something about it. So we leave it to others to do something about it. But,
mm.
what I would encourage people as like a very, very initial step is talk about it. Talk about it. And sometimes it's going to be uncomfortable spaces like, at your family dinner table. It's kind of sometimes like a conversation killer. And,
Yes.
I've been in this position many
Why are
times.
we using styrofoam plates?
Yes, yes. We don't have to be judgy, but, we can introduce those topics so that people realize that it's not a faraway thing. It's not something that we need to think about 10 years from now. It's happening now. We need to talk about it now, and we need to think about solutions together. And it really does start with conversations. We've had multiple people come through Eco Madres sharing their stories, right? And one particular one struck out in which an environmental activist now, but back then she was just a little girl growing up in her home in Los Angeles. And little to their knowledge, they had this oil well polluting in their backyard. And they would, smell all these terrible
Whoa.
odors. Their kids were getting sick. And so moms after work would just, gather together and say, like, what's happening? What are you experiencing? What have you heard? And they would start piecing together all this information and finally connected the dots that it was that oil well behind their neighborhood that was literally harming their kids.
Whoa.
And so that's how they band together, because they started those conversations, right? So if people don't know, they don't know, and they're not going to act. So that was a long-winded way of saying, talk about it. Start
Talk about
talking
it.
about climate and environment and making those connections, because it's not easy to connect those dots. And you can be that, conduit to igniting kind of that fire in people to take action.
And Ecomadres tiene mucha información en inglés y en español. And so, especially for the other things, that Earth Day, I think, needs to be every day.
Yes.
Because, yeah, well, we are taking action and there's a lot of conversation and buzz around it.
Mm-hmm.
It's what do we do every day to make sure that we're not adding to the issue?
Yeah, I love that. And just like Earth Day should be every day, Hispanic Heritage Month should be every day, right?
Right.
And I think it's great, to have these events pop up in our community where we can go and find what makes sense for us to do, right? It's not easy to identify what more we can be doing. Like, yes, we're conserving energy at home by turning off our lights when we're not in the room. Yes, we're recycling the bags. We're exchanging a plastic bag for now a reusable bag. Like, we're doing all these little things that are within our power, within our knowledge to do. But there's a whole world of other things that we can be doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, at a large scale here in the US, we have the power to use our voice and speak to our elected officials and saying, this is what we need to happen
Mm-hmm.
to protect our families, our communities, our livelihoods. And so at Eco Madres, we kind of make that or break that down into more digestible steps. Like perhaps when you join, the first step you do is learn about this topic that may be in your backyard, right? Some pollutant refinery, let's say, in your backyard. And we have a petition for you to learn a little bit more about it. We have a template laid out for you, and you just input your information and you send it to your elected official,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's a easy to do step to introduce you into the world of advocacy if you've never advocated for something before. Or then, you join a webinar of ours, and then we arm you with this opportunity to testify in front of the EPA, right? Like the average person doesn't think that they can do that,
Right.
right? It's the scholars and
Y
the folks
Latinos
holding the
menos.
PhDs. Exactly. Menos de Latinos. We don't think that that's within our rights to do, but it is.
Correct.
These folks out here are elected to hear us out and to work for us.
They work for us.
They work for us.
Y eso es algo súper importante, perdón que te interrumpa, que creo que we need to stress it more and more and more and more y mucho más, porque calladita culture, por ejemplo, puts people in authority as like they're on a pedestal and we can't touch them type thing. And to your point of literally what you just said, es importante recordar y muchas veces educar because they don't know, especially our parents or grandparents, no saben que elected officials work for us. No saben que like the mayor of your city, like their role is to listen to what you need to say because they can't virtually be everywhere. And so the voices of the people that exist in the spaces are I don't want to say supposed to, pero we also have this responsibility to go back to them and say, este es un problema y necesita resolverse because they won't know that. They can't virtually be everywhere.
That's right. And I know a lot in our community, may fear kind of ruffling feathers or calling attention to themselves for various reasons, and one of them being, your status in this country. But we can engage in civic duty in various different ways. It doesn't matter whether you have papers or not. You can still take action in various ways, and that's kind of where we come in to support you in that, in providing the understanding of what is possible, within your comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
So, we're here to just make that lift into civic engagement and to sharing your voice and your stories a little bit easier. At Eco Madres, we really want to break those barriers in our participation as active, citizens or residents here in this country, and telling our stories about why it is so important to fight for stronger environmental protections, for our kids, but for our communities that have been pushed to the side for far too long. And so we really want to just be that resource to our communities, help people feel empowered in stepping up, stepping forward. And we're here, to be a guide or a resource. So we encourage everyone to reach out to us, whether it's via our socials at Eco Madres or on our website, ecomadres.org. Just, hit us with your questions, with your concerns. We're here to chat. And yeah, we hope that you reach out to us.
Total. And what I love is that people don't have to do it alone. Porque muchas veces what could stop people back is like literally what you said, repercussions, ruffling feathers. Pero when you have a group and when you don't have to be the face, eso puede como ayudar a que la gente tome más acción, ¿no?
yeah, there's definitely, power in the people, right? Um, we can take Dolores Huerta as an example. She was a leader in so many fights to bring justice to our communities and to women's rights as well, right? And so just looking at those examples of folks that have come before us, when you come together as a group, as a community, we are stronger together. And definitely love that you mentioned that, because that is part of what we hope to do here, right? Build community, build not just understanding, but build safety in these spaces where we might not have felt comfortable before. And so what we know to be true, and this is across the board in all our environmental and climate movement, is that there is power in collective action. It can feel so heavy to take any one of these topics on by yourself. It can bring on so many different feelings of anxiety, of overwhelming, of, you name it. To some, it can even lead to depression because you don't know what the future holds. But when you come together as a collective unit, you can rely on each other for support, whether that's in terms of just like talking about it and releasing those feelings, or brainstorming as to what action we're going to take together. It really does help to fortify you in the action that you're going to take. And so
Mm-hmm.
definitely encourage folks to come together for this fight.
I love that. Tell us all the places and spaces where people can find about you, about Eco Madres, all the things, all the links.
Yes. Well, you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook at Eco Madres. On Facebook, we're Eco Madres USA. And certainly reach us via our website. It's www.ecomadres.org. You can also reach me directly via those social channels at Liz Hurtado. And we are just so happy to be in this space chatting with you about these super important things. We know it's not easy to talk about. It's not, something that we do often, but I do hope that folks start to talk about this a little bit more. Come and join us in discussion. We are always here and happy to help.
Especially those who may not believe it's true. No, como ese comentario like, the rainforest is thriving. What?
Our rainforest is hurting.
Yeah.
It may be true that there's progress, in certain spaces, but that doesn't mean that it's happening everywhere. And we need to continue to fight for protections for our environment, for our rainforests, for our people. So,
For sure. Liz, last few questions. Do you have a remedio that you want to share with us?
yeah, and it's probably so timely right now as I'm battling this throat thing, probably allergies, but might be
Yeah.
something else creeping up. It's a jarabe de cebolla. And I know many in my, I guess, region, in Peru, Bolivia, do this, but it's so simple as just, mashing cebolla in a mug or something and just mashing it down with a little bit of sugar. And you just spoon that into your mouth like syrup or like honey, kind of. It's kind of that consistency.
Nice.
But that's soothing. I mean, that is something that gets me through the day, probably more than any of the medicines that I have tried. And I've tried them all. So, yes.
I mean, this is where remedios work. Remedio is the first medicine ever existed.
Exactly right.
And do you have a quote or mantra that you live by?
This is something that I started telling my kids very early on, even before I joined this space. It's that they can make a difference in the world. And
Hmm.
I used to be that cutesy mom that would write it on like the bathroom mirror or whatever. But now they do this themselves. We are so happy to be growing in this space where self care is now at the forefront. And so my kids come up with their own things, whether it's like I am beautiful or I am enough or I am powerful. Like all of these are so important reminders. It doesn't have to be just one a day. You can hype yourself up all day long, because the more we say it, and
Yes.
especially when we say it out loud, the more it holds true. Um, Words are powerful. The same way negative words will impact us negatively, the more we say these powerful, reaffirming, reassuring words, the more impact it will have on our day to day.
I support that. And the last question, do you have a productivity tip, trick, or tool?
Yes, I have quite a few. But two that I definitely do every day is, one, I mentioned how breakfast is so important to me. But really, it's that whole first hour of my day that is so important. As a working mother, there's so many different things and to-do lists that I have to try to complete in any day. But before I jump into that, before I even open up my, email inbox from work, I take that hour for just me time. I've shipped the kids off onto
Mm.
the bus. Hopefully, they all have their lunch boxes, and then I take time to cook myself a nice breakfast. Sit with my hot cup of coffee and not let it get cold.
Hmm.
I might even step outside, let the dogs, play around in the backyard and just soak in some sun. But whatever it is, I take that hour to myself because I know I won't have that again in the next, 23-hour period.
That's right.
And then the second thing that I do, because, we all know life can get overwhelming and we have all these lists, um, I break down those lists or that task of the day into very small, digestible tasks. So it can be this one large thing I got to do, but I break it down into tiny little microbites and start with that first thing. And it can be as easy as like, I don't know, find the number for that customer service representative, right? Like it has to be so small that I'm like, hey, I did that one thing. I feel accomplished. Moving on to the next, right? But it kind of gives that little boost of dopamine. I'm like, yeah, I did something, and then I can continue. Because otherwise, these large tasks can just feel so daunting, and we're like, we're just going to put it off till tomorrow. But for me, at least, that helps me boost my productivity because I feel like I accomplished something. So that's something that I do day to day.
I'm a recovering procrastinator. And so people come to me all the time for productivity. And I always tell them if the quote task feels too much, it's a project, it's not a task.
Yes, yes.
And so 100% with you, break it down into like teeny tiny bite sized things like open the notebook could be a thing, like
Honestly, yes.
because we get, especially for me, as I have ADHD. And so it's the bigger the task, the less I want to do it. And so that breaking it into tiny little things, sometimes like my neurotypical people in my life, they look at my list and they're like, really? Really? That's, and I'm like, listen, it works for me. Don't judge
If
me.
I could show you my notebook right now, I myself have ADHD. And what I learned, and this is another productivity tip perhaps for our neurodivergent audience, is whenever possible, either try to gamify something or make it visually appealing. So, in my rolling to do list for the day, at the top, I will have little hearts in different colors, right? Little hearts that will say breakfast, coffee, shower, medicine,
Yes.
And as I go through each one of these tasks, I will fill in those little hearts and I color them in. And then I have like this must do list, but then I also have like, what did I do for myself? And throughout the day, I'll just color this in. And it's just a visually appealing reminder for all the things that I have to do in my life. And as a someone with ADHD, that has really helped, because everything else just sometimes seems mundane and just heavy, but that just makes it a little bit more lighthearted to get through the day.
Yes. Gamifying things is the best. And yeah, I like one day I'm going to create a video, like not a video game, but like some sort of maybe a video game to get people to get things done. Because with you 100%, when I try to make my to-do list super fun as well. I have post-its, I use all the things, and it's like it makes a difference.
Absolutely.
Well, Liz, thank you so much for coming to Cafe con Pam. This was awesome. Thank you for your work. Definitely, listeners, check out Eco Madres. I do love the work that they do. It's a great space. You can find local groups for based on your location. So invite your abuelas, your tías, your mamás, tíos, everyone, porque también hay recursos en español. I think it's something that's really key, especially porque lo que platicamos, we get narratives from various different sides, and why not keep exploring and critical thinking, apply critical thinking to to what we do. So, Liz, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure being on your show.
Thank you. Okay, listeners, that was my conversation. Please do screenshot, tag us, let us know what resonated with the episode. I hope you learned a lot from the various data points that we shared. We didn't share too much on the data, but I think I found Eco Madres is a great resource to just explore. It blew my mind to learn about the buses because, as a child free woman, thinking about the fuel that is used in school buses is not something that necessarily I have to think about because I don't have to deal with it on my daily life. However, I do have nieces and nephews, and the majority of them take the bus. And so, because of the various realities that our community has to live with, like working parents or parents that have multiple jobs. And so we have to rely on public or school transport. Having this information, I think it's really important because we don't know what we don't know. And so having information allows us to make more informed decisions. Y bueno, if it's your first time here, welcome to Café con Pam. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you stay. I hope you come back. This is your opportunity to hit subscribe, to hit follow, to drop some stars, to leave a review if you feel called to do so. It helps us a lot. The more reviews the podcast has, it really supports the credibility of the show. It supports potential listeners who may be thinking about tuning in. And so, your thoughts, your words, your time, your stars really is an easy way for you to support. As an indie podcast, as a small business, your supports really help. So, thank you so much for considering and taking the time to leave them. Y por otro lado, I would love to stay connected. Follow at Café con Pam Podcast on Instagram and Facebook. Check out our website, cafeconpam.com. That's where you can learn about all the things that I do, how we can work together if you're interested, how you can listen and learn more about the various interviews and the different ways that we share stories. It's really cool to be able to have built a platform where we share stories. I'm like, it's just such an honor. And recently I did a closing keynote for a business conference, and it warmed my heart to be able to tell the story of Pam 8 years ago when she had an idea and a microphone she bought online from a retired rapper, and how we have arrived into this moment where we have over 350 stories, and it's just the beginning. And I remember during that speech, actually, I share how I almost quit. And thanks to you, listeners, because you don't let me, here we are still. And so we wouldn't be here with over 350 stories if you didn't listen. So thank you. Thank you so much for continuing to show up, for being here week after week, or when you binge us, or whenever, when you tune in. But it does help to subscribe and to rate and review if you're still here. I recorded this in the past because next week, or the week when you're listening to this, I'm going to be in full blown move. The week when I'm recording this, I'm packing my old apartment. The week when you are listening to this is when I am going to be unpacking, basically. And so I wanted to make sure that this was recorded in case there were some challenges with the internet, something happens. And so we're being proactive here. Look at me, recovering procrastinator, being proactive. It took me a lot. It's 3 p.m. I'm recording this at 3 p.m. I was supposed to do it at 7 a.m., but hey, we did it. And that's an accomplishment. So, listeners, thank you so much for being here today. I so appreciate you. Un abrazote. Y bueno, como siempre, Stay shining.
Sabrosura pa' ti que.